Thank you all so much for coming to Everest Group's second breakfast briefing of 2024. My name is Julian Herbert, Vice President based here in the UK, based in London. You may recall, those of you who are here, first of all, great to see so many old friends and want to see new faces. That's really good of you. Those of you who were here in January may remember that I opened with a little snippet from the news about an American academic who'd said that tea tasted better if you put salt in it. Do you remember that? I mean, it was just outrageous. Today's outrageous piece of news is that Scotland drew last night. I'll leave it for you to decide whether it's outrageous that they didn't win, but anyway, there you go. So that's today's outrageous piece of news. Before we get going, I want to spend 20 seconds, if I may, on Everest Group Engage. So this, if you like, is a sort of the baby brother of a major new initiative. So Everest Group launched an events business earlier this year, and the inaugural flagship event, the big brother of this, is Everest Group Engage. And the theme of that is the pragmatic edge, as you can see there. Mixture of Everest Group data and guidance, some practitioner expertise. The intention is that there will be a ratio of 4:1 GBS sourcing practitioner to provider. And that event takes place from the 30th of September to the 2nd of October in Dallas. And we would expect, we hope that there'll be about 10-15% of attendees will be international, from outside of the US. So as many of you who would like to, please find out more about it on the website, and we look forward to seeing you there. Okay, and so to today. The overarching theme is artificial intelligence, as I'm sure you're all aware, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Two angles on this. The first angle is a discussion on where we are on the hype versus reality matrix, and that's going to be moderated by my lovely colleague Shirley Hung, and I'll introduce her in just a second. And then we're going to look at emerging AI regulation, EU, UK, and the impact of that, and that's going to be moderated by me. We've got some fabulous and very, very generously given external expertise, blended with the research-fueled Everest Group insight. So thank you very much in advance to all our external speakers. It's really, really, we're delighted to have you with us, and thank you very much for your time. So I'm going to introduce Shirley Hung. She is a US-based partner in the BPS practice. She combines a great blend of practitioner experience from her time at Rio Tinto and some consulting and advisory experience from her time at Mercer and Harcourt. She's also an honorary Londoner, having spent a year doing her master's around the corner at the London School of Economics. So, Shirley, over to you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I didn't know that I was going to be moderating this session until this week, but I'm so thrilled to be talking about this disruptive technology that everybody has been talking about, generative AI. And what we want to do in this panel discussion is to debunk some myths, talk about what the real state of adoption is for generative AI. And I'm joined by a couple of esteemed colleagues and practitioners in the market. So perhaps I will ask you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anil. I'm a partner with Everest Group, and I've been tracking, AI and automation technologies for almost a decade now. Even before, generative AI was all the, rage. So it's been interesting observing the market over these several years, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Anil. Bobby Abraham. I lead a consulting business, which is really focused around finishing what was not finished. A lot of organizations initiate large transformation programs, and I essentially sit between the gap of strategy and execution. That's what I do.
Morning, everyone. Ian Humphreys, Director of Value Consulting at Databricks. My role is really to convert the technology into the business impact and help organizations understand how it drives value for them. So nice to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Ian. So just to kind of kick us off, I guess the first question is for you, Anil. So much hype has been generated on generative AI. Do you think that the reality so far is living up to that hype?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to believe that it's been 1.5 years since the whole ChatGPT thing, captured our popular imagination, and I think that trend continues in terms of the interest it's generating, right? But we're starting to reach a phase where it's kind of an awkward phase where we still believe in the potential of the technology, but we, at least from an enterprise perspective, we are realizing that the core technology itself is not sufficient, right? You need an ecosystem around it. So whether that means an orchestration layer or governance or an app ecosystem, we are starting to understand that is necessary. Now, having said that, early adopters have been working off largely generic foundational models with techniques like prompt engineering and RAG applied. And some of them are seeing early success, right? So if you look across some of the use cases where we are seeing a reasonable degree of scale or success is around things like agent assist in contact center, any form of content generation in marketing, of course, code generation for software development, things to do with documents, all sorts of processing, summarization, etc. And then there's another smaller category of use cases where you're starting to see usage of generative AI for pattern detection, right? So cybersecurity, you have threat prevention. Again, on the R&D side, you've had things like AlphaFold for protein synthesis and generation. So those kind of things are also starting to come into play. So still early stages is what I would say. There's still quite a long way to go.
And Bobby, what do you think?
My past life was very much around life sciences and banking and largely within corporate transformation. I think we all haven't forgotten our days of the hype around business intelligence and analytics, and everybody was so focused on getting BI and analytics sorted out. And I think we are very much in that phase where there was a huge gap between the analytics we produced and the reality in the marketplace, how divergent those data structures were, and the gap that we really found ourselves in. So where we are today is really people are moving beyond just the productivity layer, moving on to a level of personalization, a level of prediction. And in my life at AstraZeneca, we got to a level of prediction in financial planning and almost eliminating 2 cycles of budgeting and forecasting of 4 cycles in a year. Now you can imagine when you free up 30, 40 resources globally doing this as a full-time job, these are experienced colleagues who can now get redeployed doing something else. So I do believe organizations have the capacity, have the investment needed to get to where we need to be, but almost view this as another technology label that is being stuck on a very poor use case of badly managed, unstructured data. So I hate saying this, but perhaps lipstick on a pig. So that could be your start for the day.
And Ian, anything to add from you?
Yeah, I would probably concur with everybody else, right? Last year, big long list of generative AI use cases that largely commissioned by CEOs. Probably like 10% of those are actually getting close to production. And what we see is customers starting to consider things like actually the overall accuracy of the models. Does it get them what they need in terms of performance and that uptick in their business? They are starting to worry about costs because if you take large models, they have large costs associated with them. So you need to make sure that your use case is really going to deliver that long-term value. And then I guess ultimately it is about highlighting that gap. You have generative AI over here, but most organizations are still trying to organize their data. So how do you fill that gap in terms of data maturity? So I guess those are some of the things that we're seeing that are probably at the root of that kind of 10% or less in production. But they tend to be more internally focused use cases. So the kind of the summarization, maybe the call center type stuff, cybersecurity as well, definitely coming up. But yeah, there is a down to earth with a bump around Gen AI at the moment. But it has definitely a long way to go.
So speaking of some of the early adopters, what are the key lessons that companies are learning around generative AI when they're trying to implement that within their environment?
I guess, one of them is, I suppose, quite a few of what I've said already, right, is are you going to be able to sustain this in long term? Like, do you have a cost model? Do you have a way of delivering this sustainably that will make sure that you deliver the return? I think there's a big challenge actually with talent as well within the organization. So yes, you can use the off-the-shelf model, but if you really want to drive up accuracy, you need to look at beyond RAG, so fine-tuning, pre-training, and do you have the skills to be able to do that within your organization, or do you need a partner? How do you bring people on that journey with you? So I guess those two things, privacy as well, of when you flip over from an internally facing use case to an externally one, like do you own the IP? Are you sure about that? Do you present some kind of risk? So those are all things that are kind of starting to come into the consciousness around Gen AI.
I think we've all been wrangling with data for long periods of time. And when we get to that point where it is ready, we start to feel all the internal blockers of compliance and audit and the ethical AI police all around you. So sometimes the barriers are more internal, but for those of us in this room, perhaps I suspect or predict there's about 5% in this room or less than 5% in this room that have really got use cases that have really been scaled and been out there externally used. But for the rest of us who are perhaps wait and watch or trying to be followers or early adopters, the real challenge that we tend to experience is really around all the debt that we haven't paid. All the tech folks in this room will talk about technical debt. All the data engineering companies will talk about the data debt that we've got. But the real business problem that we all have is what's the skills debt? What's the process debt? The processes we've been operating at best are tuned to the days of the internet age, and we haven't really tweaked it. We've perhaps, with all good intention, moved those processes by functions from one organization to the other, or some big four has sold us great processes which are world-class at a hefty sum. And that's what we have constrained ourselves with. So how do you unlock some of those processes that are upstream complicated, downstream miserable to manage? And the fourth P of our morning half, we talked about productivity, we talked about personalization, we talked about a layer of prediction, but the fourth P really is about it is painful. And the internal pain is really around the process debt and the skills debt that we all have. And yes, there's an ecosystem of people out there that want to upskill, but at what pace and at what cost? One of the questions I was asking Ian this morning, and we'd met earlier in the week, was really, what's the cost versus payback? We're all used to 2 or 3 year NPV on large programs. But yeah, everyone's going to sell you a proof of concept. But when you start to scale it, what is the ROI? And perhaps that's a question for the room and something for us to think about later.
Yeah, so I agree with the points you both raised, Bobby and Ian, but I think The other thing which I'd like to point out is that, so we've all spoken about use cases from the very beginning, right? But I think it's now time to maybe re-examine use cases in light of where we are with respect to the technology maturity and the ecosystem maturity as well. Because with a more horizontal and a powerful technology like generative AI, there's always a tendency to maybe look at it as a silver bullet for everything. But we really need to understand the business problem and the technology fit, right? So we talk about product market fit, for instance, and we need to base that in the reality of where we are now from how the ecosystem has developed, right? So typically use cases that we see today they share some characteristics, the ones which actually are succeeding. So generally they're information or knowledge retrieval based, typically not fully autonomous, right? Or nowhere even close to autonomous. It's used in assistance of humans. Typically unstructured, typically cost of error is low, right? So we have reached a point where we can also start to refine how we identify use cases. So that's something I'll add.
Thank you. So we've talked about how most of the use cases right now are still in pilot or early stages. What are some of the barriers and the risks, challenges in terms of moving to production?
I think the largest barrier I'm seeing is internal. And, we joke about the ethical AI police, but these are colleagues with the right intent. We've got to protect the brand, the reputation, the risk, and we're operating in territories with very little trust in the economic environment. So therefore, I think that to me is some of the biggest challenges. Yes, we want to try and inspire people to go and do those proof of concepts and have those models that can scale fast or fail fast and all the fancy words. But really the challenge is, can you then get it into production at scale for a global organization to try and do this, I don't know, let's say 150 entities around the world, even if it's internal, all of the regulatory challenges that come along. To me, that is the overarching challenge. The second part of it is a large part of the enterprise layer wants to remain as walled gardens. And when I say walled gardens, these are protected for a level of IP. But then you're actually sourcing in a lot of unstructured data, whether it's text or videos or audio, to come in and help you. So trust is a large part of that ecosystem. I think those are two big enterprise-level challenges before we talk about people and culture and the skills and the process gaps.
Yeah, just on that idea of scaling, I think most organizations, that barrier to scale comes from the kind of the prompt scenario where you're taking a large language model and then suddenly you have thousands of people hitting it every minute. It becomes very cost prohibitive. And so what we're looking at with customers is, how do you create something that is a small language model that is very specific to your task and the business problem that you're trying to solve, that makes it much more affordable, makes it much more accurate. But then you run up against that challenge of skills. Like, how do you then go and do the kind of fine tuning and pre-training to get the accuracy and make it profitable internally? And I think we're not there yet, but we'll eventually get to things like auto LLMs. We have auto ML. We're going to have auto LLMs. Probably not that far away, but that's really where we need to get to do this at scale within organizations. So I think careful selection of use cases is really important to make sure that you're able to deliver at scale and that it makes it worthwhile to deliver at scale.
Anything to add, Anil?
No, not really. I kind of agree with most of the points which have been raised. I think barriers to scale also, exist around the maturity of the technology and I keep coming back to this point, but also the ecosystem which has developed around it, because, if you want ease of adoption, it's in cases where technologies are quite horizontal, reduction in choice actually sometimes is much help. Is actually quite helpful in making adoption easier. So, yeah.
On the other side of the equation, what is some of the value delivered and some of the impact that you've seen from these early adopters and use cases?
To be honest with you, I haven't seen far too much value other than on beautiful slide decks. And I always turn to page 73 of the Strategy House deck and look at the number of zeros that follows a number. And I think there's exponential value over time, and it's yet to be proven. And I'm not a skeptic, but I'd also say it's another technology label that perhaps we will stop naming in 10 years' time. I might be wrong, maybe 5 years.
I think, sorry.
Right, okay.
Yeah, no, so, see, I think early adopters have had certain pockets of value, but I agree, broadly, it's not necessarily all pervasive, right? And that is a typical case with any sort of early adoption. But I think what is going to happen is, so Ian, as you mentioned, small language models starting to come in. That is going to make things more resource efficient, maybe more specific for particular use cases as well, fine-tuned and so on. So that's one thing I'm going to keep an eye out for as to how that develops on the foundational model layer. The other part is, again, as I mentioned, the app ecosystem, which starts to develop around it. So you have packaged solutions. And even within that, I think there's this category of agentic AI, which pretty much everyone's working on, right? So this is where generative AI is taken from your information or knowledge-based kind of use cases into action, right? So think of it as an end goal being that, I can use an agent to type in a particular goal, and it goes and figures out the right kind of workflow, goes and executes it, and it's all automated. Obviously, that is an ideal end goal, which we'll probably never reach. But even if we reach somewhere in between, that changes the game for generative AI. So this is something to keep an eye out for, and pretty much everyone is working on it. So right from your hyperscalers and big tech to, automation vendors to AI-based startups in Silicon Valley. So the next 12 to 18 months, I think, if that comes through, then it can be pretty great, game-changing in terms of value.
I'm going to be quite bullish on this, because I do actually think organizations are seeing value. It is limited, and a lot of that is to do with maturity or the stage where they are in actually rolling it out at scale. But so just give you a couple of examples. One of our customers, a utility company, they're sending out 70% of their emails to customers are generated by a large language model. So that frees up their resource massively, but actually they're getting better NPS scores from those generative AI emails than they did from the humans. So there's a double benefit there. Internally within Databricks, we're using it for code generation, so actually building our product. Our users are also seeing it. It's embedded in the product now. We have a productivity survey that we run all the time. It's ongoing. We have over 1,500 responses so far. 65% productivity gain from those people using our Databricks assistant. So we are seeing it. The question is, well, with 65% more time, what are they doing? And that's, as business leaders, that's up to you to decide what you want to do. Like, do you want to cut your workforce by 65%, or do you want to have them do other things that drive much more incremental value for your business? So it's there. Another interesting use case was around kind of fashion retailer generating mood boards through artificial intelligence to help speed up product design, and now they've launched their first product that came from generative AI in terms of inspiration in that process. So that creative process is actually working for them as well. So.
Great.
I'm really upbeat about this, but I am realistic that there is a challenge, and there is a gap for many organizations between the kind of traditional data and generative AI.
And that's the voice of sales and my voice of the business.
That's why you're both here.
I think I fall in the middle ground. But yeah, no, I still agree the potential is there. I mean, it will be realized. It's just a matter of other things coming together for it to be mass adopted.
Yeah.
In early adopter scenarios, there are still, like I said, pockets of great value. So another example to your point, I've seen. So, for example, in regulatory filings, so I've known of use cases where the time to do some of these regulatory filings in let's say life sciences, it's been brought down from several months to like a couple of days, right? So I mean that's huge in terms of the savings, but it required a lot of doing though from a generative AI perspective. So yeah, it may not necessarily be ready for mass adoption at this point, but pockets of value exist for sure.
So, Anil, I'll ask you to kind of shift in terms of looking at your research crystal ball. If you're going to look forward, 6 to 12 months from now, what do you think we can expect to see? How can companies prepare for that?
Yeah, so I think I may have already, played my cards too early because I spoke about agentic AI. That's one key thing for me. I think that is going to be game changing. So I don't know if all of you have heard of some of these things come up on the consumer side, right? So you have had like personal usage devices like Rabbit R1 and Humane Pin and all that stuff, all of which have been tremendous failures. Let's not necessarily exaggerate what it's doing, but those are early prototypes of what the concept of agentic AI can do, right? Which is, like I said, attain a particular goal through self-determined or actions, right? And do that autonomously. So that coming into the enterprise space is what I'm looking forward to. Of course, the cost of error in an enterprise is much higher. So, there'll be much more iteration or many more iterations before it actually gets perfected. But I'm really looking forward to that. And then the other piece is, more efficient foundational models. These are two main things for me.
Okay. And just to kind of wrap things up, again, looking forward, if you had a wish list in terms of, what does it take to get generative AI to realize its full potential? This question is for all of you. What would be on that wish list?
Okay, this is a really personal one, and it is the ability for those people driving this technology forward to communicate much better around the impact that it has for the organization, because the mass adoption will only come through the better understanding of clearly how it transforms your business. That's my particular role in Databricks, is to help do that. But I think it's core to the success of any technology. Generative AI is just one of those. Whatever comes after that, it will still be the same challenge. So how do you make it relevant for individuals?
My wish list is a bigger paycheck in terms of budget. Number one, because this is going to be hugely expensive to do. Let's not kid ourselves. And I think the communication part, I agree with you, Ian, is more around how do you really explain that value? How do you communicate that? How do people get on board that journey? So yeah, I would flippantly say a bigger budget, but I think it really is around how do we demystify what's in it for our colleagues, what's in it for our customers, our vendor groups, and ultimately how do you then drive it back to better outcomes for the enterprise and its core purpose. So number one, I'd say value. Number two on my wish list would be I wish we could bring down all of our legacy ways of working and start afresh and kill the company and start as a new, beautiful, independent stack. That would be beautiful. That's my second wish list. Third, I would say really equipping our people. And I think we are operating in a world where our iPhones or whatever devices we use in our personal lives, the gap between that and the minute you open your legacy IBM laptop or ThinkPad or whatever it is. That's the gap. That's what we're going to really face. So it's that aha moment around the iPhone moment of having that same experience in our personal life and we open our desktops. As soon as we can navigate and converge those gaps, I think that'll be a beautiful wish list.
Yeah, I know we're getting up to the end of time, so I wish for more time on this panel first. But let me talk about generative AI. I think even there, I think the idea should be a degree of patience, because I think the comparison has been that, and the comparison which is tossed around is the early days of internet, right? So we do have let's say the routers and all that stuff being sold at this point. So similarly, you have the chipsets and so on. But then, on top of it, you have the ecosystem being developed of the internet itself, apps, web applications, all those kind of things, right? So there's a degree of patience which is required. These things will come through. I don't think the technology itself is something that we should, quote unquote, lose faith in. It is extremely powerful, but it may take more time.
Well, thank you very much, Ian, Bobby, Anil, for sharing your perspectives. I think what we heard here today is that generative AI is, some of that hype is actually warranted. I think there's still huge potential for the technology, if only because there's a pull from the users to use it. It's so intuitive. From a change management standpoint, it's practically none, right, from a user perspective. And that makes it incredibly different from previous waves of technology shifts, right, and developments such as RPA or blockchain. Those technologies seem to have been done onto you. Nobody asked for it, right? Whereas generative AI is something that is being pulled. You want it, you're entertained by it, you want to use it further. And therefore, I think some of that hype is warranted. But as you've heard here today, it needs to be tempered by some reality checks around what your system environment is like, the work that companies need to do in terms of getting their data in order, the work that governments need to do to actually regulate its use ethically as well. But I imagine into the future, we won't actually be talking about generative AI anymore as a standalone technology. It's just going to be part of our everyday in the same way, as Bobby said, our smartphones are, right? But thank you very much, and thank you.